Echoes of Justice. This is a fictional historical novel and not based on real events. In the soft glow of an autumn sunrise, when the dewy mist still clung to the ancient cobblestones of the small, yet bustling town of Arbourton, a place whose winding lanes and ivy-clad walls recalled the grandeur of a forgotten era and whose spirit bore the indelible imprint of bygone nobility, young Edward Lancaster, a nobleman whose countenance was as earnest as his heart was bold, set forth on a journey that would forever alter the course of his destiny. Born into an illustrious lineage whose honour had been steeped in both triumph and tragedy since time immemorial, Edward found himself at a crossroads of fate, compelled by an inner longing to see justice done as his family's name had suffered under the weight of injustice and cruel machinations. In the hazy light of remembrance, he recalled how on many a quiet evening, by the flickering flame of a solitary candle in his ancestral manor, he had listened intently to the whispered legends of valour and sacrifice recounted by his aging tutor, Mr. Jonathan Fairchild, whose erudite descriptions of honour and the sacred duty to defend the weak had kindled in young Edward a desire to right the wrongs that numerous hearts had silently borne for too long. The early hours of that fateful day were filled with a palpable mix of trepidation and hope as Edward strolled along the meandering lanes of his hometown, his keen blue eyes absorbing every detail from the delicate trailing vines that adorned the time-worn stone arches of the town's ancient aqueduct, to the gentle murmur of voices emerging from lively market stalls where merchants, their faces etched with the wisdom of years, extolled the virtues of a simpler, yet nobler, world. As he walked, his mind wandered back to the painful memory of his father's unjust imprisonment, a wound left by the duplicitous schemes of corrupt men who had conspired in the dark corridors of power, leaving behind only the bittersweet legacy of a once luminous family honour now tarnished by envy and deceit. With every breath of the crisp morning air that carried the scent of damp earth and distant sea salt, Edward's resolve to seek justice grew fiercer. He yearned to restore the lost dignity of his name and, in so doing, to rekindle the dying flame of hope that burned in the hearts of the oppressed. Every step he took felt heavy with the burden of destiny and the quiet determination of one who had, against all odds, vowed to reforge the shattered fragments of truth into a mighty banner of righteousness. Venturing beyond the modest boundaries of Arbourton, Edward embarked upon a solitary journey through landscapes that seemed as much a part of his inner world as the turbulent emotions that surged within him. The road wound through sunlit meadows and over rolling hills that echoed with the songs of ancient bards, their verses lingering like the gentle whispers of a bygone era. In the distance lay the formidable city of Eldermere, a place fabled not only for its splendid cathedrals and bustling marketplaces but also for the troubled intrigues of its ruling council, a council whose members, it was said, had amassed power through means that were as questionable as they were clandestine. It was there, amidst the grandeur and the shadows, that Edward anticipated encountering both adversaries and allies alike, each with their own part to play in the unfolding tapestry of justice and redemption. On his path, Edward soon became accompanied by a diverse collection of souls equally touched by the uncanny hand of fate. Among them was Alexander Beaumont, a man of considerable learning and quiet dignity, whose lifelong experience as a scribe in the royal archives had endowed him with not only an encyclopedic knowledge of history and law but also a compassionate understanding of the human condition. Alexander's deep, mellifluous voice often served to comfort those trembling in despair, and in the long, meandering conversations that unfolded during the long rides along dusty roads, he and Edward discussed the nature of power, honour, and the fragile interplay between justice and mercy. It was Alexander who introduced Edward to the idea that true justice was not to be found solely in the rigid application of the law, but in the warm embrace of compassion and the steadfast courage to remain true to one's principles amid the chaos of an unjust world. Their dialogue, full of both lofty aspirations and the sober truth of hard experiences, lent a soft, uplifting cadence to the journey which contrasted pleasingly with the bitter winds of betrayal that had so long swept through the corridors of Edward's memory. Another companion who soon joined the gallant traveller was Marianne Spencer, a spirited young woman of keen intellect and an unyielding will, whose gentle smile concealed a heart indefatigably brave and tender. Marianne, whose origins were modest yet whose inner nobility shone more brilliantly than many of her aristocratic peers, had long been an outspoken critic of the rampant corruption that plagued the regional administration. With eyes that sparkled like the morning dew on delicate rose petals, she recounted her own struggles in defying oppressive traditions, and her dialogue, laced with both wry humor and unflinching sincerity, became a source of solace amid their shared hardships. "Edward," she would often say in a calm yet resolute tone, "the pursuit of truth is a path stained with tears and sacrifice, but it is also the road that leads us back to ourselves, where the seeds of justice, once sown, bloom into a garden of hope." Her words, echoing in the quiet moments between the rhythmic clip-clop of horses' hooves on ancient roads, fortified the young nobleman's resolve and enriched his understanding that the quest for justice was as much an internal journey as it was a confrontation with external evils. Thus, with companions both learned and compassionate gathered around him, Edward's journey took on a deeper, more existential hue as the trio traversed the undulating landscapes of a land that was at once both harsh and benevolent. Their travels were punctuated by moments of rare beauty and the quiet epiphanies that arise when one is forced to reckon with the transient nature of mortal life. Together, they paused by the banks of the meandering Riverton, a broad, languid river that mirrored the shifting moods of the sky, and in its silvery currents they saw reflections of all the faces who had suffered through the machinations of shadowy power. In hushed conversation under the boughs of ancient willow trees, Edward and his companions contemplated the allegorical interplay of light and shadow, concluding that while the dark forces of corruption might temporarily obscure the world, the luminous power of justice, much like the radiant sun bursting forth after a cloud-shrouded dawn, would ultimately prevail over despair. As the days melted into weeks and the seasons began to tenderly shift, the motley band found themselves approaching the fabled city of Eldermere, a sprawling metropolis whose elegant facades and gallant spires testified to an age steeped in both magnificence and mystery. Amid the labyrinthine streets and echoing halls of its ancient stone citadels, they encountered figures whose allegiances were as shifting as the fickle winds. Among them was the enigmatic Lord Henry Cavendish, a man whose refined manners belied a mind as cunning as a fox and whose loyalty, though hard-won, could prove to be a powerful ally in the fight for what was right. In one memorable encounter within the marble-clad courtyard of the Eldermere Academy of Arts and Sciences, Lord Henry, his dark eyes glinting with both determination and a trace of melancholy, spoke softly to Edward about the corrosive influence of unchecked power. "My dear Edward," he said in a measured, almost musical tone, "justice is not a prize to be awarded to those who can claim it through brute force or avarice, but a delicate flower that must be nurtured by understanding and compassion. Only by embracing the intricate tapestry of human frailty and forgiveness can we hope to restore a world so long ravaged by the ambitions of the unjust." His words, heavy with the weight of personal experience and the scars of bygone battles, left Edward both humbled and galvanized, spurring him to delve even deeper into the complexities of the moral struggles that had come to define his own existence. Within the resplendent halls of Eldermere, where intricately carved stone statues and vibrant stained glass windows narrated the eternal struggle between good and evil in silent, majestic testimony, whispers of conspiracies and clandestine alliances floated beneath the surface of polite society. It was here that Edward learned the true nature of the forces arrayed against him, forces that not only had conspired to see his family brought low but had long been entwined with a network of treachery and subterfuge that extended its icy hands even into the hearts of those who had once been considered friends. Among these shadowy figures was the notorious Baron Frederick Montclair, whose reputation for cruelty and cunning was matched only by the chilling precision of his machinations. In a tense and remarkably realistic exchange in a dimly lit corridor behind the grand marble staircase of the Duke's palace, Edward found himself face to face with a subordinate of the Baron. "You speak of justice," the man hissed in a low, sibilant tone that carried the fatalistic cadence of one long resigned to sin, "yet you are blind to the fact that justice is a luxury afforded only by those with power to enforce it. In these times, truth is merely a tool and instrument to be wielded by the strong against the feeble." The remark, delivered with such bitter finality, sent a shudder through Edward's soul, galvanizing within him an intensity of purpose that was at once both a balm for his past wounds and a call to arms for the future. He envisaged a future where the downtrodden might rise with dignity and every unjust act would be met with the unwavering light of retribution tempered by mercy. Yet, even as dark winds of treachery blew across the polished marble floors of Eldermere's corridors, there emerged moments of tender humanity that underscored the indomitable capacity of the human spirit for love and renewal. One such moment occurred during an unexpectedly serene twilight dinner at a modest tavern on the outskirts of the city, where Edward, Alexander, and Marianne found themselves sharing warm bread and spirited conversation with humble townsfolk whose lives were woven with threads of both sorrow and hope. Amid the convivial hum of laughter and the soft clink of pewter cups, Marianne recounted in earnest the story of her childhood in a nearby village, where despite the relentless onslaught of hardship, the communal bonds of kinship and compassion had fostered an unyielding resilience. "There is beauty even in the simplest of hearts," she confided softly as she passed a bowl of steaming stew to an elderly man with kind, melancholy eyes, "for it is in each beat of a humble chest that the rhythm of justice is born, a cadence that cannot be silenced by tyranny or despair." Her words, glowing with an inner radiance, instilled in Edward an even deeper conviction that his path, as arduous and laden with peril as it might be, was illuminated by the very sparks of human goodness that had survived the relentless onslaught of injustice. As the journey pressed inexorably onward, the trio traversed verdant countrysides dotted with ancient ruins and sun-dappled vineyards, where every stone and every whisper of the wind seemed to conceal secrets of ages past. In these times of quiet reflection, Edward often found himself wandering the solitary lanes at dawn, meditating on the legacy of his forefathers and the uncertain promise of tomorrow. The interplay of nature and time, a gnarled oak tree standing resolutely against the ravages of 100 winters, the murmuring brook that carved its way through rocky clefts served as constant reminders that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the forces of renewal and justice were inexorable. It was during one such reflective walk, with the first fragile rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy of a sprawling forest, that Edward encountered a venerable minstrel named Charles Winterbourne. With a weathered face and eyes that glowed with the gentle wisdom of a life spent in the service of art and truth, Charles recited verses that seemed to bind the scattered fragments of the past into a single, coherent narrative. "When tyrants reign and justice hides behind veils of lies, it is the steadfast heart that brings forth the dawn. Let every sigh and tear be the stepping stone to a day where truth, like the unyielding tide, washes away the stains of deceit." The cadenced melody of his voice, so resonant with the timeless beauty of a well-told tale, lingered in Edward's ears and emboldened him to continue his noble quest with renewed vitality. But the journey toward justice, much like the meandering course of the ancient river Riverton, was fraught with turbulent rapids and unforeseen obstacles. In the political heart of Eldermere, where allegiances shifted with the transient whims of fate, Edward and his companions found themselves entangled in intrigues that put their principles to the ultimate test. During a clandestine meeting held in the shadow of a dilapidated abbey, its imposing stone walls echoing with the murmur of secret plots, Edward came face to face with a former confidant, Richard Ellsworth, whose eyes now shone with the glint of ambition tainted by treachery. "Ed, you must understand," Richard pleaded with a disarming mix of sorrow and unrepentant zeal, "that in this labyrinth of power, ideals are the currency of fools. Justice, in our realm, is not bestowed by the meek but seized by those who dare to wrest it from the clutches of despotism." His words, though delivered with a veneer of rationality, rang hollow in the heart of a man who had spent his entire life cherishing the sanctity of honor. Edward, with measured calm and a voice that trembled not from fear but from the unwavering certainty of his truth, responded, "Richard, though the mechanisms of power may twist and distort the visage of justice, it remains as pure as the spring that nourishes the parched earth. I choose rather to trust the steadfast bloom of hope than to barter my soul for fleeting strength." The conversation, fraught with both regret and fierce conviction, encapsulated the eternal conflict between pragmatism and idealism, a dialectic that would come to define not only the destiny of a noble house but the very essence of what it meant to be human. In the days that followed, as the dark spectre of Baron Frederick Montclair's influence loomed ever larger over the corridors of power, Edward was soon forced to confront the bitter truth that the road to justice was never a solitary one. Together with Alexander, Marianne, and a growing cohort of men and women who had, for various personal reasons, taken up arms against the forces of corruption, he began to weave a tapestry of resistance that drew strength from the unity of diverse souls. Their meetings, held under the cover of night in remote cellars and secluded groves, bore the solemn air of a sacred convocation where every whispered plan and every shared hope were acts of defiance against a tyranny that sought to keep truth in perpetual darkness. In these gatherings, voices rose in earnest protest, blending the poetic lamentations of lost innocence with the fierce declarations of a future yet unseen. "We must be the custodians of light," declared Marianne one crisp evening, her eyes alight with the fire of conviction that had been kindled by the tribulations of her past. For even in the depths of despair there lies a promise that as long as we dare to dream of a world where justice reigns supreme, the darkness can never claim our souls. Her stirring speech was met with resounding murmurs of assent that, like the harmonious peal of church bells on a quiet morning, resonated deeply within the hearts of all who listened. The seasons turned and, as winter's chill gradually yielded to the hopeful embrace of spring, the struggle for truth reached a fevered pitch. Edward's eyes, ever vigilant, beheld a shifting landscape of alliances, where the old order, worn thin by years of neglect and corruption, was on the brink of collapse. Along narrow alleyways lit only by the trembling light of a solitary lantern, he encountered both friends and foes whose faces were etched with the bitter complexities of loyalty and regret. In one such heart-wrenching encounter with a distraught servant of the Baron, a man whose gentle soul had been broken by years of subjugation, Edward learned that the weight of injustice affected even those who, though lacking in power and influence, bore witness to its cruelty every day. "My lord," the servant whispered, his voice quivering like a fragile leaf in a storm, "I have seen too many good people crushed beneath the heel of tyranny. Tell me, is it not the duty of every honest soul to rise against such injustice?" The question, spoken with such raw vulnerability, stirred in Edward an even deeper commitment to the cause he had embraced so wholly. With the calm assurance of a man who had seen both the light and the darkness of the human spirit, he replied, "Dear friend, every act of compassion, every stand taken for what is right, weaves together the tapestry of a future where even the smallest voice can contribute to the chorus of justice. We shall prevail, for hope is the one true force that no tyrant can ever extinguish." As the great struggle advanced into a crescendo of tension and conviction, the resonance of long-forgotten virtues began to infuse even the most desolate corners of the fractured realm. In a moment of sublime clarity, with the resplendent hues of a rising sun painting the horizons in shades of gold and crimson, Edward found himself alone on a windswept hillside overlooking the ancient battlements of Eldermere. The panorama, a blend of serene beauty and resolute fortitude, mirrored the inner landscape of a young nobleman whose quest for justice had evolved into something transcendent, a pilgrimage that not only sought to restore his family's honor, but also to redeem the spirit of a people long subdued by the caprices of fate. In that silent communion with nature, Edward recalled the words of Charles Winterbourne, the minstrel whose verse had become an anthem of hope: "Let every heart, scarred yet unyielding, be the beacon that guides lost souls back to the light of truth." With renewed determination, Edward resolved that this sacred duty was one he must fulfill, even if it led him through the very heart of darkness. The wines whispered secrets of ancient heroes and noble sacrifices, each note a timeless reminder that justice, like the eternal flow of the mighty river, would carve its path through even the hardest of rocks. Thus, in the wake of alliances forged in the crucible of adversity and the quiet triumphs of small, compassionate deeds, the tale of Edward Lancaster and his brave companions came to embody a larger truth about the human condition, a truth that transcended the transient boundaries of power and wealth, and which spoke, in a language older than time, of the inexorable triumph of hope over despair. Their struggle, though strewn with obstacles that would have daunted even the mightiest of warriors, was marked by the gentle kindness of hearts determined to see that every voice, however quiet, was heard in the great, symphonic narrative of existence. In the end, it was not the clashing of arms nor the stratagems of cunning that would decide the fate of the oppressed, but the steadfast belief that every act of righteous defiance was a step towards a future where justice reigned and every broken soul could be mended by the warmth of mercy and truth. In the years that followed, as the storm clouds of corruption slowly dispersed to reveal the radiant blue of a renewed sky, Edward Lancaster emerged not merely as a nobleman vindicated but as a living symbol of the eternal promise that justice, when pursued with both passion and compassion, is indestructible. The legacy of his family, once dimmed by the spectre of deceit and oppression, was gradually rekindled by acts of generosity, the relentless pursuit of truth, and the unyielding support of those who believed in the possibility of a better world. Even as hardships continued to test their resolve, Edward, Alexander, Mary Anne, and their many steadfast allies forged bonds that transcended social station, cultural divides, and the very limits of human endurance. Their collective courage, tempered by setbacks and nourished by the light of hope, was celebrated in quiet ballads and whispered legends, passed down from one generation to the next as an eternal reminder that every act of kindness and every stand for justice propelled forward the slow, inexorable march of progress. On one particularly memorable evening when a gentle rain had washed away the dust of despair from the streets of Eldermere and the city itself seemed to shimmer with renewed promise, Edward found himself in quiet conversation with a venerable councilman, Mr. Benjamin Hawthorne, whose wise, kind eyes had seen the ebb and flow of fortune over decades of service to the people. Seated together in a modest drawing room lined with books that chronicled a history richer than any tapestry, Mr. Hawthorne mused softly, "Young Sir Edward, you have awakened forces in this land that many thought had long been buried. In your quest, you have not merely sought to right the wrongs of the past but to plant the seeds for a future in which every soul, no matter how humble, may partake in the bounty of justice." Edward, his voice steady despite the torrents of memory and ambition, replied, "Indeed, Mr. Hawthorne, it is only when we embrace the vulnerabilities and imperfections of our shared human journey that we may fortify the bonds of community and kindle the gentle light of compassion that burns away the dark tendrils of tyranny. Together, we build a legacy that no man, however powerful, can ever destroy." As the twilight deepened and the stars emerged to punctuate the vast, velvety sky with glimmers of quiet resolve, the gentle murmur of hope threaded its way through the hearts of every soul present in that humble gathering. The moments shared that evening encapsulated the very spirit of Edward's arduous journey, a journey defined not by the clamor of battle but by the serene, steadfast march of virtuous determination. In the interplay of soft light and gentle shadows, every word spoken, every promise made, seemed to resonate with a profound certitude, that the course of human events, however marred by error and sorrow, was forever buoyed by the quiet, indelible power of hope and the unassailable strength of justice. And so, as the seasons turned in a delicate dance that spanned years and witnessed countless trials and small victories alike, Edward Lancaster's legacy grew to be a living testament not only to the valor of those who dared to defy oppression but also to the transformative power of mercy, wisdom, and ultimately, love. In the tapestry of life woven by struggle and redemption, the story of his quest filled with the rich, flowing cadence of emotions both tender and fierce served as a beacon for countless souls who, in their own quiet ways, yearned for a dawn that might one day banish the long, cold nights of injustice. His journey, resplendent with moments of exquisite beauty and raw human vulnerability, was a living, breathing homage to the idea that the forces of light, once set in motion by a single determined heart, can yield an unstoppable cascade of compassion that envelopes an entire nation. Even in the twilight of his years, when the scars of past battles etched delicate lines upon his face and the memories of hardships served as both comfort and reminder, Edward remained ever mindful of the delicate balance between duty and hope. In quiet moments, as he gazed out from the balcony of his modest estate overlooking a valley kissed by the first blush of spring, he would reminisce about the long, arduous days of his youth, the days marked by noble quests, fraught negotiations, and the bittersweet triumph of moral victories over the insidious forces of greed and cruelty. It was in these reflective interludes that he found solace in the thought that every step taken along his path, no matter how treacherous or lonely, had contributed to a cause far greater than himself. For in the gentle smiles of children playing in sun-dappled courtyards, in the heartfelt laughter shared by families newly reunited after years of suffering, and in the resolute determination of a people who refused to succumb to despair, Edward saw the living proof of a truth that transcended time, that from the ashes of injustice, the indomitable spirit of humanity could rise, burning ever brighter with the promise of tomorrow. In the end, Edward Lancaster's remarkable odyssey emerged not merely as a chronicle of personal redemption or the reclamation of a noble name, but as an enduring parable for all those who believe that, even in the darkest hours, the spark of hope can kindle a revolution of the heart. His tale, a seamless blend of valor and vulnerability, imbued with the lyrical richness of forgotten legends and the pragmatic wisdom of lived experience, became a cherished narrative passed down through generations, inspiring men and women from every walk of life to stand up, to speak out, and to fight tirelessly for the sanctity of justice. And thus, in the gentle murmur of the wind and the soft echo of long ago chants, the spirit of justice, like a timeless refrain, continued to resonate through the ages, ever affirming the belief that love and courage would one day triumph over the forces of darkness. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to my channel and check out the description to find out how you can support my work.